Good morning. Oh. Hi.
That's
He's
all right.
not the most handsome guy in the room.
It's all right. I should have worn my onesie today then. That's the problem.
He has them. He's not lying. Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started. So I'm going to pray for us, and then Blake and I are just going to jump right into our talk for today. All right, let's pray. Father, I thank you so much for the beauty of this morning with the fog and the autumn colors. God, I love the artistry that you give us in nature. I just ask this morning that your Holy Spirit would be present, that you would speak through Blake and I to these women, and that you would use our story to strengthen the relationships and marriages in this room, God. And I thank you for the gift of story and how it connects us all. Bless this food to our bodies. Let it nourish us and relax us, God. And we just thank you for the care that you show in every aspect of our life. For it's your name I pray. Amen. Okay, so just to recap, last week I feel like I'm really close to the back. It makes me nervous.
I'll catch you.
No, you won't. Okay, if you weren't here, I'm Cassie, and this is my husband, Blake, and we have been married for 15 years, and we have 3 kids, twin girls that are almost 13 and hitting all the fun things, and a boy who's 9, almost 10, and thinks that he's the oldest. And we are talking about choosing your marriage, and I realized I never really mentioned kind of where this topic came about, or how it came about. And Kara and I were talking earlier this summer, and I was mentioning I went to a couple bridal showers this summer, which at this stage of life was different. We're kind of in that in-between bridal and baby shower thing. And they were asking for marriage advice, and the thing that has stuck out to me the most was that love is really not a feeling. It's a choice that you make every day, and you choose to love your spouse. And I was telling Kara that, and she was like, "Ooh, I like that. Would you be willing to teach on that?" And so that's how this came about. And so last week we talked about how your family of origin can impact the way that you treat people. And this is not just about marriages. This is any kind of relationship that you're in. You can use kind of what we're talking about in any of those relationships to help you relate better to people. And so we talked about our family of origin, and Blake and I come from vastly different families of origin. And then this week we're going to get a little bit more practical, but I want to take a second, and I want to, speaking of my family of origin, brag on this guy for a minute, and he has no idea because he's going to be mad at me. But yesterday he and I moved my mom to an apartment up here, and my family of origin, that kind of a situation would have been horrible. My dad would have yelled. It would have been full of tension. It would have been horrible. He did not raise his voice all day. He did so much because it was just me and him. And let's be honest, I'm not the strongest person in the room. And so
You did carry some very heavy things, though.
Yes, I did.
She's stronger than you think.
But it was beautiful to be in a situation where I didn't get scared that someone was going to explode at me all day. I was able to laugh and work hard, and that is because of how he handles everything. And even my mom was like, "That was different." I'm like, "Yeah, I know, right? It's great. It's great." So I just want to brag on him for a minute. So I love you. Okay, so we are just going to kind of tell you some stories and tell you how we have learned to not perfectly choose each other and choose to love each other. And some of this stuff might, honestly, it sounds like a little cliche to be talking about it, but it's great. So the first thing that I want to bring up is love languages. And again, that has been out in the world and in the Christian circles forever. However, we're going to talk about our love languages, and this is one way that is a very practical way that you can choose to love your spouse. And so I'll tell you my top love language, and my bottom love language, and then he's going to tell you his top love language and his bottom. So the top way that I am loved, the best way, is through words of affirmation. My lowest love language, which might surprise you because I'm a hugger, is touch. So.
And as you probably figured, my top love language is touch, and my bottom love language is words of affirmation or any kind of words, so to speak. So
right.
And that kind of goes a little bit back to family of origin, because both my parents were not very verbal, and like we knew they loved us, but it was not, words of affirmation were neither of theirs. So we didn't learn how to speak into that kind of stuff or do it. Both of them are more service oriented.
Yeah.
And that's kind of why, service comes easy for me. It's, even moving is like, that's kind of the same thing. It's easy.
Yeah. Which is one of the things that I initially loved about you, because I didn't come from a place where like you served other people. It tended to be kind of like self-oriented. But so early on in our marriage, and even now, especially as moms, like I don't want to touch anybody at the end of the day. I don't want to be touched by anybody, AKA him, by the end of the day, because our son is like his little miniature. He's like a replica of him.
He gets away with more, though.
With my empathy. So like he's all of that with my empathy. And so he attaches himself to me constantly, my son. And then he also wants to attach himself to me constantly. And so that is a way that like, I know that like we sit in church and I know that he likes to have his back rubbed. And so I have to consciously think, okay, I'm going to reach over, and while he's leaning forward, I just scratch his back, because I know touch, like that makes him feel connected. And like at the end of a night to snuggle and hold his hand during a movie.
Yeah. It's fun because I could tell when she's like talking about choosing, right? Like you could tell when someone's like, I know this is not what you want to be doing right now, and I know you're choosing to love me. Especially like when I'll snuggle up next to her and she's like, okay, I love you. So, but on the opposite side, it's like when I'm trying to say words of affirmation, it sounds like somebody is bumbling through the worst speech ever with a lot of ums, uhs, and theys, because I'm like, well, I yeah, you're great, I love you. It does not flow naturally, and that's not how I think. So it's that kind of opposite.
Right. So that has been a little bit challenging. Like he used to leave notes around the house for me sometimes. Like, so that was his way
what about
of
the ones in the balloons?
Oh my gosh.
Side story.
Side story.
I thought I think it was your birthday, right?
It was for you had gotten me you had signed me up for a women's retreat.
That's right. And so I was trying to surprise her, and so I thought, how great would this be? I put notes inside balloons, blow the balloons up, and left them all over the house so she could pop them.
I have sensory issues.
So she would put them in a room.
I would shut them in a room with my hand in there, like, and keep the door closed and try to pop it, because I don't like.
It was startling. It was not as enjoyable as I thought it would be. But there was notes inside, so you had to get them popped so she could get the notes.
Right. And so I will say, like, early on in our marriage, it was a lot easier to choose to love each other in the other spouse's love language. And you brought up a good point yesterday. You said you wanted to mention.
Yeah. Totally good point.
Okay, I don't want to do all the talking.
I don't remember what.
It was about like how, like when I do words of affirmation to you, it's important to realize like.
Oh yes, we were talking, kind of choosing each other. That like kind of when I know she is, saying words of affirmation to me, or when I'm serving her, it may be her bottom love language, but it's important to realize that, hey, she is saying words of affirmation to me. It may not mean much to me, but it means the fact that, hey, she is choosing. Like, I know she is not able to be touched right now. Like, it's like, hey, I cannot do this for you. I cannot give you your top, but I can give you my top. And that's realizing that and understanding that, hey, she's choosing to do this.
And your top love language tends to come more easily to you. So like words of affirmation flow from me. Like they just come out, and he made a good point that it's important to also realize when your spouse is speaking with their love language, they're still trying to love you. And so to show grace and to appreciate that for what it is, and not be like, well, that's not my love language, so I'm not going to appreciate it, and you need to speak to me in mine. So it's being gracious with each other. And
yeah, like there's been nights when like the kids have been a lot because they've been home all day or something, and you're at night saying, you know, hey, I'm really proud of what you did here, did that, and like they're words of affirmation that still mean something. I mean, that I'm not saying that they don't mean anything. Or like when I've got a lot that I'm thinking through, whether it's work or something else, and I'm like, I can't think. There's energy thinking of words of affirmation, but I can do the dishes, and that's easy because it's mindless for me. It's my top love language. So I can do that, knowing that yes, that may not mean as much as words of affirmation for her, but I also know that it helps her, and she's like, okay, he's in this with me.
Yeah, it's still a way to love. So love languages are really important, and if you don't know your love language, that's something that because they're like what? Touch, gifts. I like gifts. Words of affirmation, quality time, and acts of service.
Her bottom, my top.
Well, that's not, I mean, it's like down there. Acts of service. It takes a lot for me to look at somebody else and be like, oh, I could do this for them, which is makes me sound like a horrible person. It's just not how my brain works. So it's really important to find out your love languages, and then also talk about that with your spouse or significant other or a friend, like, and figure out, because again, this stuff is for any kind of relationship. We're just talking about it in the marriage realm. And
some of it's too is understanding those different, and it helps knowing they're out there, so that like when you're having conflict and the other person is, you can see them doing something that it basically gets you outside of yourself. Mm-hmm. Like, I realize she's giving me a compliment in the midst of a conflict or right after a conflict to try and help with that.
Like they're trying. The other person is trying. So it helps kind of neutralize the conflict. The other area that gets a lot of attention in right now and in the church, and as it should, is Enneagram numbers. And once we discovered that, we learned so much about ourselves. And
I only know myself and like a couple other numbers. I can't.
It's fine. You don't have to keep track of everything. You don't have to know everybody's number. But we have a saying, and I've mentioned this before when I've taught, that my nickname early on in our marriage was the Dream Crusher. And that was because he is like an idea guy, always thinking ahead.
I'm a 7.
What? You weren't supposed to say that yet.
I mean,
he didn't say that. And I am like constantly seeing what could go wrong, how we could fix that, so early on, he would just talk about something that he does this all the time, an idea. And I would be like, well, that's not going to work. And here's why. And I crushed all of his dreams. And finally we realized, okay, I just need to let him talk about it. And if he really starts going down a path that might change our family's trajectory, then I will. But once we figured out what Enneagram numbers we were, he's a 7. He's very future oriented. He told me, he's like, if I'm not thinking ahead, I feel like I'm falling behind. And I was like, well, that's exhausting. My gosh.
Energetic.
Because I'm a 6 and I live in the present. I am really good at seeing anything that might go wrong. And I'm really great at problem solving. And before we realized that those were parts of our personality, just who we were, it was a big area of conflict in our marriage, because I was like, why can't you just be content? Why can't you just be in the moment? Why are you always like, oh my gosh, you're exhausting? And now I look at him and I'm just like, oh, that's the 7 in you. And he always had FOMO, constant FOMO. And that was that. I'm like, just be content being here with us. And I took it personally because I was like, what if it just means he doesn't want to be with us and he doesn't like our family life? And, I took it very personally. And now I'm like, well, that's part of who he is. He needs to know that he can, go out with people if he needs to, or I need to stretch myself a little bit and go to a party or go out in public for a while.
The longer we've been together, the more I would say we were ends
You're
of that.
totally coming to the dark side of the introvert
Yeah, so
world.
like she's coming to more of the extrovert side, and I'm coming more into the introvert side, and so there's a bit of that kind of rubbing off of like our personalities.
Yeah.
Being with her more, I see more of that kind of 6 of what could go wrong. It's a little easier for me to be like, I think I was talking with Michelle about this. It's easier for me to say, okay, here's all the things that could go wrong. I can't control these 5. I'm just going to forget about them. And I can do that. You probably can't.
I can't shut that down.
So,
I do think you are a 7-wing 6, though, which is probably why you can.
But I do kind of sometimes go to, I guess it's 8, right? The other wing?
Yeah, you do.
Sometimes, yeah.
Sometimes. Anyway, so we're just having a conversation up here, the two of us.
But helping understand the other person helps there during that like conflict or where they're coming from.
I love personality tests. I love learning. I love figuring out, like I love problem solving. And I don't know if that's just who I am or if it's a trauma response from growing up. Like if I figure out why someone's acting the way they are, I can either understand it or I can help them figure it out or I can calm everything. Like I don't know what it is, but it's just something that I love.
I love that you love that. And then you can tell me about it.
And then I tell him.
So I don't have to learn it.
So I send him like pins on a 7 or pins on a 6 and how they interact and like so anyway, all of that to say, once you learn that about yourself and your spouse learns it about themselves, you guys can talk about it together. And there's a lot of things that it's really easy to take personally in a marriage that really has nothing to do with us. And it's all about who your spouse or who your friend is as a person. And when you understand that, one, we can much more easily show grace. It will strengthen your marriage because now whether or not he wants to admit it, he values the 6 in me that can problem solve for him. Because if he didn't have me, he would probably fly off in a million different directions because that's just who he is. Like he loves all of the things.
Your 6 keeps me focused.
Right. And the 7 in him helps me loosen up a little bit because I would be a hot, anxious mess if I didn't have somebody like him who was like, babe, that's not something that you can even control or worry about. And I'm like, oh yeah, you're right. Sweet. Okay. I can let that go. But
and realizing a bit of where we're coming from too helps because over time you tend to somewhat have some of the same fights or conflict, and the more you have them, and the more you start realizing the other person, the better that conflict. The more you can kind of be like, oh, this is the same fight we had, and it's not because of X, Y, and Z. It's because of who the other person is and their personality and their service style. Like we've had fights where it's like, hey, you're saying I don't value, and I'm not telling you,
feel value,
and I'm saying the same thing. It's like, man, you're not doing anything service-wise for me, and so if you have that 2 or 3 times, you start realizing, oh, this is not something personally. Like, hey, I'm actively choosing not to love you,
right.
Or why are you crushing all my dreams?
Right.
After multiple fights, that's kind of like
so. One of the
helping.
ways that we choose to love each other is I wish that he was better at words. Very true. Like I do. That would be amazing because that is my top love language. However, when he tries, I'm so grateful for that. And I have had to let go of the expectation that he is going to be like the men and like the historical books that I read that like just flow with this beautiful words and compliment the people like
because they were not usually written by men.
Right. Touche. And so I have had to let go of that expectation and love the person that he is and choose to appreciate when he does do that and choose to appreciate the fact that 2 days ago, he did dishes twice for me in one day. Yesterday, he moved my mother for like the 4th time and didn't complain about it.
We didn't have a piano this time. It was much easier. It was
great, yeah. But like, I am choosing to see those things and think he's a good man. And then,
I try.
I don't. The acts of service thing would mean a lot to him. I literally.
But you did that. I mean, was it like last week or something when work was really crazy? And this is going to sound crazy, but I don't know if you want me to share this or not.
It's fine. I have a messy bedroom.
Okay, it's
fine. I know where you're going with this.
Okay, yeah, you do.
Yeah.
And I like kind of clean laundry.
My bedroom is my one place where I can stick it to the man. I think we've talked about this before. Like, I love my living area to be neat, but like I don't want to hang up my clothes at night. So I'm like, you know what? I'm a grown up. I don't have to. I'm going to leave them on the floor just because I can. It is my one act of rebellion.
But out of love, she's like, I picked up my clothes and put them away.
And I made the kids pick up theirs.
And so she had everybody clean the upstairs because
the laundry
chaos.
just gets piled in our room. And I knew it was a big deal to him. And all the kids were complaining. I was like, yeah, I don't like it either, but we're going to do it anyway. So let's like suck it up and let's do it. And it was torture and I hated it, but I knew that like I knew it would mean a lot for him.
It does, and it helps.
And I told him, I was like, look what I did. Look what I did.
Yeah. It didn't go unnoticed.
I wanted to make sure he knew. I was like, because I love you. I literally said, because I love you, I cleaned this up because I needed him to see it.
And I don't think it's the end of the world to like, because sometimes we get so absorbed with kind of like, you know, your role as a mom and the kids and stuff, and my role, you know, whatever it is, I think we get so absorbed with what's in front of us and what we've got to do that even when they're showing
we might
love,
not see it.
You might not see it. And I think, in my opinion, it's okay to be like, hey, FYI, you know, I did this for this reason.
Like, probably not all the time.
No.
But for sure, just a little like, I just want you to see this.
Yeah.
Just see that I love you. And I chose to do that because I know it would mean a lot for you. And maybe it's not okay, but for us it works. So occasionally, not a lot. Don't do it a lot. Don't do it a lot. So anyway, that's just, we just feel like it's easier to like tell you stories about how we have chosen. And again, there's a lot of times where we don't choose to love each other well. So please don't think we're up here with like this like rock star stellar marriage. And, you know, no, like we have fought very hard to like get our marriage up to where we want it to be. And we're still fighting every day to choose to do that. So.
And I mean, when you're in the middle of conflict or even in the middle of just being, I think there is definitely Satan's out there saying, hey, look, it's just easier not to have to go into that conflict, or it's just easier to, you know, for me, the effort of like, hey, listen, you know, sometimes it's like, oh, just think about yourself, or hey, just go do acts of service when she really needs words of affirmation or something like that. It's like, okay, I need to fight back that urge of, hey, just take the easy way out. I guess I would call it that. Like the easy way out of loving her that may not necessarily mean much to her, but it's like, well, check mark, I did my duty to love her by doing this, you know, when it's a lot more.
Well, and in this season of life that you guys are in and that we're still in, it's so hard to not be like self-focused and legitimately so, because you don't ever get to focus on yourself. There is so much value, though, in taking a little bit of what's left at the end of the day and focusing on your marriage, too, because the return with a healthy marriage and a marriage full of love and support far outweighs 100% self-care.
And that's easy to say. We don't always do that.
Totally. Like like, please hear us. We're not up here saying that we've got it all figured out. I mean, just earlier this week, we were super cranky with each other, so it happens. Although today, we were like really cranky, but not with each other, against everybody else in the world. And we're like, sweet, at least it's not each other, because we're just really tired from yesterday. And we're old, and we got out of bed and we're like, oh, it hurts. Everything
hurts. I just grabbed
hurts.
ibuprofen before we got on stage.
So what you're going to do today is I want you guys, we're going to give you just a little bit of time before you head to your groups. And I would like for you to think through what your love language is. And I would like for you to look at your Enneagram number if you know that. If you don't, it's okay. You could talk about it in your groups. But think through how those impact your relationship. And if you're not getting loved in that way, how that impacts you. And then the really cool part, I'm excited about this. It's homework a little bit. But I want you to come up with 5 ways that you best feel loved from your spouse. Like what they could do, make it tangible, not like fly me to Hawaii but tangible everyday things that your spouse can do to love you well. And then this you have to do. You have to go home and ask your spouse to do the same thing. And then you guys can share the lists and try to incorporate those into your marriage. Once a week, great if you can do it every day, but logistically, life happens and kids are hard but try to incorporate some of those intentional ways. And because it'll be something from a list that they gave to you, it'll be easier for them to realize, hey, wait, she's choosing to love me right now, and vice versa.
And depending on your husband, sorry, but as the only guy in the room, we may not have thought through that, or we may not. It took me a while to realize, because I was just floating along. I'm not an introspective kind of guy. And so it may be that may be harder for the guy to be like, oh, I never thought about this, you know. Yeah. Some husbands are very.
Yes, I agree with that, and I have a very strong 5, so he's analytical. So I'd be younger in our marriage, and I'd throw these ideas at him. It wasn't fun. And so when we went through love languages with our kids, and I did a little quiz that was like, do you feel more loved when you come home from school if I've cleaned your room or I bought you a new shirt? You know, 2 different love languages. Then suddenly the light bulb's going off for Steve, more like, so I think if you've never done love languages, because she's asking you to think about that, asking different questions out of that category, I still say to Steve, you know, I would feel really loved if the garage were swept. Well, he'd much rather do something else, but I'm an acts of service person. And I have one question.
Yeah.
I love this perspective, being an acts of service person. So you need touch. How do you?
No.
I need touch. I'm the person that likes touch.
He is touch acts of service.
Yeah.
Those are pretty.
So how do you feel when you see her doing all that hugging in church? Just curious.
That's a really good question.
Because I'm watching my husband do acts of service for other people, and so even at my age, I'm like, wow, he's doing that again.
You know, it's.
And we talk about it.
Yeah.
Okay, really quick, for those of you who are watching online, Brooke just asked how Blake feels when I hug a million people a day, knowing that that is not my, like, that's so.
It's honestly, for
different
me,
for
it's
me.
interesting that hugging people, because it's a quick, hug, and that doesn't. What I've had to wrestle with is a little resentment towards my kids, because they get it all and there's nothing left for me sometimes. And that's the hardest thing for me, is realizing that this is a stage, it will end. But like she says, my son is all over her, and he is literally like climbing a tree all day. And it's the exhausting, whoever has boys in here, it's like literally climbing all over her. And so then when he goes to bed, it's like, nobody touched me. And I'm like, but this is my time. Like, so that is actually a little bit harder than, because the hugging doesn't really necessarily, and she actually likes hugs. Yeah. So like if I ever wanted to hug her, she's fine with that.
Oh.
It's the other like cuddling and hand holding and back rubbing.
And let's be honest, like sometimes it's like, I would like just a hug, like with no expectations for anything else. So if we all know what I'm talking about. So like that, we've also had to talk about that too. Like I don't mind more physical touch, as long as like not every single time I touch you, like with something else happens. So
it's true.
Like there's that too. So yeah, that was a great question. Does anybody else have any other questions? We are totally fine opening that up, but I do want to give you some time to like process through. Kara, is there anything that you want us to? No? Okay. So you've got about like 4 minutes until.
It's 12:15.
Right? Is that right?
No, it's not.
No,
even
you've
close.
got 2 minutes. And no, I didn't
Somebody
ask if you were right.
freaked out there, I know.
I was asking if that was right. I don't know that is. Oh, you've got like 2 minutes. Take 2 minutes. Take 4 minutes. How about 5? We're going to take 5 minutes before you get up to get more food and move to your groups. And I want you just to take some time to either think through your 5 ways that you're loved, take one of these things that you can practically take home and discuss with your spouse or a friend or community or something. And then I will dismiss you to your groups.